There's a fear that grows in silence, a fear of not being enough, of not being able to make the other person happy. You can see it in the hesitant gaze, in the words that remain unspoken, in the gesture that withdraws out of fear of making a mistake. The doubt isn't about love, it's about deserving to be there. But perfection isn't expected. What's expected is presence, truth, a sincere effort, even if it's imperfect. No one needs to have all the answers. What matters is being willing to search together. When there's a choice, failures aren't so frightening. Insecurity diminishes when you understand that you don't have to carry everything alone. It's not about impressing anyone, it's about staying even when afraid, staying even with uncertainty. Staying because it's worth the attempt. Happiness isn't found ready-made. It's built in the details, in the mistakes, in the real attempts. And when there's genuine feeling, that's enough to keep going. There are silences that say a lot, and they're not always easy to decipher. Sometimes what seems calm is in fact a whirlwind inside, a poorly disguised fear, a doubt that finds no rest. It's common, more than you might think. Someone silently questions whether they can sustain what they feel, whether they have what it takes to make the other person happy. And when this questioning grows too large, it becomes a weight, a burden that steals spontaneity, that paralyzes even the simplest gestures. It's not a lack of love, quite the opposite. Most of the time, those who love deeply are precisely the ones who doubt themselves the most, because they fear failing, disappointing, not being able to keep up with the other person, not being enough. And the world doesn't help. The pressure for self-sufficiency, for certainties, for a perfect love, as if such a thing exists, only deepens this internal chasm. Someone feels small. They see themselves as less than they truly are, not due to a lack of worth, but because of excessive comparison, excessive expectations, excessive fear. This is where the conflict begins. Because it's not easy to be around someone who sees themselves this way. Those who doubt themselves too much start doubting others as well. They begin to question the love they receive, read into signals that don't exist, and expect an ending, even when everything is just starting. So, how do you deal with this? How do you coexist with someone who is afraid to exist beside you? The answer isn't in promises. It isn't in grand gestures. It lies in the hardest detail, consistent presence. The quiet strength of someone who, even while seeing the other's insecurities, stays. Someone who doesn't try to fix, but rather walks alongside. Someone who doesn't demand certainty, but builds trust gradually. It's important to understand that the fear of not being enough doesn't disappear with speeches. It fades when one realizes they can make mistakes and still be accepted, when they understand there's room to stumble and continue moving forward. But there's a warning here. Constant doubt also wears you down. The person on the other side feels it too. They also grow tired, because loving someone who constantly questions themselves takes more energy than seems fair to bear alone. Then comes the moment when choices must be made. To take the risk of being vulnerable, to stop fleeing from what they feel and finally allow themselves to stay. Because deep down, everyone wants to be chosen, not for what they show, but for what they hide, for what they try to disguise, for what they're afraid to reveal. And if there's something that sustains any relationship, it's the understanding that neither is there out of obligation. They're there because they want to be, because they believe, because even without guarantees, they feel it's worth it. That's why fear, no matter how loud it is, can't be the one to decide. It's what distorts intentions. It sabotages connections. It turns affection into doubt. But when there is truth, it loses its power, because truth brings people closer, even when it hurts, even when it exposes. She has the power to resolve misunderstandings, to calm thoughts, to show that no one needs to be perfect. They just need to be willing, and being willing is rarer than you might think. It's rare to find someone who looks at flaws and says, "That's okay, let's face this together." It's rare to find someone who chooses to stay even in the midst of another's internal chaos. But it's in this kind of choice that something emerges that goes beyond passion. It forms a bond. It fosters complicity. It gives rise to real love. This love does not shout. It doesn't demand. It doesn't constantly keep score. It observes. It respects the other person's pace, but it also makes it clear that it won't be waiting indefinitely for insecurity to resolve itself, because there's a thin line between understanding and self-neglect. One must know how far they can go, how far the other's doubt does not turn into pain within themselves. Still, as long as there's dialogue, there's a way forward. As long as there's truth, there's room to rebuild. Even if certainties never come, mutual commitment can arise from the conscious choice to walk side by side. And perhaps that's the key, realizing that no one needs to be completely ready. It's the willingness to grow together that sustains any relationship. Imperfections exist. They will always exist. But when there's genuine feeling, they don't drive people apart, they bring them closer. They show that humanity is present, and where there is humanity, there is possibility. Fear, no matter how present it may be, doesn't define anyone. It simply reveals that something important is at stake, that the other person matters, that the relationship matters. And it's precisely for this reason that it can be so frightening. But nothing solid is built by running away from fear. The only way to overcome it is to stay, even while trembling, even without certainty, even when feeling insecure, staying. Now that is a courageous choice, and upon staying one discovers that it wasn't necessary to be everything. It was only necessary to be truthful, to be someone who acknowledges their flaws but also takes responsibility for them. Someone who knows the weight they carry and still tries not to hurt those walking beside them. There's no formula, there's no ready-made script, but there's the raw, naked reality. Loving someone who questions everything all the time requires patience, but it also requires boundaries. It requires presence, but it also requires clarity. It requires empathy, but not at the cost of oneself. And those who love need to understand this. They must know that love is a construction, it's a choice. And no matter how much fear arises, it cannot be the one in the driver's seat. Because those who love take action. Even in fear, even without certainties, they move because they know it's worth it. Finally, insecurity isn't the problem. The problem is the silence that settles when it's not shared. The problem is the absence of conversation, of presence, of mutual effort. But when there's dialogue, everything can change. Not magically nor immediately, but genuinely, gradually, with truth, with imperfection, with a genuine desire to continue, and that is enough. But only as long as it remains true, because not all effort is reciprocal. Not all doubts come with the intention to confront them, and therein lies the danger. When someone sinks into their own insecurities without taking responsibility for them, the other begins to fade away, gradually, without realizing it. They start to give in, start to overlook things, start to carry what isn't theirs, and when they finally notice, they no longer know where affection ends and weariness begins. It isn't fair to expect the other to stay strong while their own presence fragments. Relationships do not survive on the idea of love. They survive on what is built in reality, in the dialogue that is sought even when it's hard, in the listening that happens even when it hurts, in the daily choice not to run away. There's a profound difference between someone who feels fear and continues and someone who feels fear and hides behind it. The fear that paralyzes becomes a wall, and those on the other side begin to bang against that wall every day, until they get hurt, until they tire. And what happens when that fatigue sets in? The bond weakens, the touch loses warmth, words lose their meaning, the presence loses significance. It's inevitable. No one can be strong for two. No one can love for two. There comes a time when even the deepest feelings drown in neglect, not because they ceased to exist, but because they ceased to have space. That's why it's urgent to talk about emotional responsibility, about what to do with what you feel. Because love is not an excuse for absence, nor for coldness, nor for constant confusion. Being afraid is human, but hiding behind it and expecting the other person to always understand is inhumane and cruel. And it's worth repeating here, you don't have to be ready, but you must be willing. Willing to recognize where it hurts, willing to learn where it fails, willing to build even when nothing seems stable. No one is demanding perfection. What's being asked for is presence, coherence, and a real desire to evolve together. When this willingness exists, the relationship changes direction. It stops being a field of insecurity and becomes a space of healing. Yes, healing, because there are bonds that do not save, but do heal. There are relationships that do not erase fears, but make facing them easier. And that is rare, precious. But it only exists when there is effort from both sides. Without this balance, what was love becomes a burden. It turns into waiting. It becomes lonely companionship. And no feeling can withstand that indefinitely. Sometimes the silence of someone who loves is a suffocated plea. Say you're here. Show that you still care. Prove in some way that I'm not the only one trying. But this plea dies when it encounters absence, when it finds someone who prefers the comfort of their own doubt over the risk of facing their feelings. That's why at some point it will be necessary to decide. Either allow yourself to live your feelings with courage or watch everything crumble due to cowardice. Sitting on the fence hurts both sides. And one day, the one who loved fiercely will leave in silence, not for lack of love, but from too much exhaustion. And if it reaches this point, there will be no speech that can fix it. Because what is lost in silent abandonment cannot be recovered with late regret. When someone sees the other giving up, often they try to chase after them, but by then, it's already too late. Because what has been broken is not the feeling, it's the trust. The trust that it was worth the wait, that it was worth the investment, that there would be a real commitment. Therefore, it must be understood, insecurity may indeed exist, but it needs to be faced, it needs to be named, it needs to be taken seriously, because when you love, what's at stake is not just your own fear, it's the time, the energy, the heart of the other person too. And that other person cannot wait forever. There is a limit to everything, including the most patient love. But if the decision is to stay, to continue, to truly try, then be all in. Not in pieces, not with the body present and the soul distant. Look into their eyes and say, I'm scared, but I want to. I don't know everything, but I'm here. I'm not perfect, but I will learn. And then, yes, there is a chance to build something solid, to make the relationship a safe space and not a field of doubts. Because when there is reciprocity, even fears become smaller, even old traumas quiet down a bit, even heavy baggage feels easier to carry. Loving someone is not about erasing their pain. It's holding their hand even when it shakes. It's saying, I see everything that frightens you and still I stay. But this choice must be made by both. One person cannot bear it alone. Now is the time for a decision to be made. Will you hide in fear, or will you use it as motivation to do things differently? Will you wait for the other to get tired, or will you finally show that it's worth trusting? Will you continue to doubt yourself to the point of pushing away those who love you? Or will you allow that love to strengthen you? No one can answer this for anyone else. This is a personal choice, and it defines everything that comes after, because there is no neutrality when it comes to connections. Omission speaks too. Absence communicates as well. A lack of action weighs heavily. Those who hesitate too much hurt others, even without intent, even while trying to do right. Because at its core, it's not just about what you feel, but what you do with how you feel. Love that goes unexpressed becomes doubt. Doubt that remains unresolved becomes anguish. And anguish that repeats itself turns into weariness. This is how many relationships die while still alive, not for lack of love, but due to an excess of silence. From fear of commitment, from fear of showing oneself, from fear of feeling and getting lost along the way. But the fear of losing cannot outweigh the courage to stay. Those who want to maintain a bond must learn to sustain it. And that requires more than pretty words. It demands real presence. It requires conscious decisions. It requires emotional maturity. It's time to stop pushing responsibility onto the other. If he loves me, he'll understand. If she knows me, she'll know how I feel. No, she won't. No one is obligated to interpret eternal silences. No one has to guess unresolved intentions. What is not said does not exist. What is not shown does not touch. What is not claimed does not last. Little by little, the lack of positioning poisons everything. It turns care into demand, it turns hope into frustration, it turns love into exhaustion, and what was supposed to be a refuge becomes a minefield, full of uncertainties, full of tension, full of unspoken words. The bond unravels like this, when one side carries the relationship and the other hides behind their own excuses. There comes a time when it's no longer possible. You can't keep justifying what has already turned into disguised disinterest. You can't continue nurturing expectations from someone who only offers absence. Those who do not decide also choose. Those who remain silent also speak. Those who avoid also create distance. And when the other finally leaves, it's too late to say you didn't want it to happen. The lack of attitude, I've said this before. In the end, it all comes down to presence. Not the kind that's spoken, but the kind that's felt. The kind that remains during tough days. The kind that faces discomfort. The kind that chooses to stay even when it would be easier to run away. Because love isn't just a feeling, it's a choice. And those who don't choose, lose. Sometimes they lose what they didn't even realize they had. So for those who are silent, speak up. For those who are afraid, confess. For those who still feel, prove it. Before time takes away everything that could still be. Now, if this topic struck a chord inside you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Comment below. Have you ever experienced something like this? Have you been on the side of doubt or on the side of someone who waited too long? If this content resonated with you, give it a like. That helps us keep bringing reflections like this one. And if you want to receive more content with this same intensity, subscribe to the channel. The conversation doesn't end here. It's just begun. See you in the comments.